let's move on to Draymond. Then he's had a very eventful week.
Oh my, yes.
Now it's
Spicy
kind of
Draymond.
it's almost hilarious compared to other guys that we watched in our childhood. I mean, Draymond might be somewhere in the middle of the pack, but considering the time that we were in, he's considered this kind of controversial player. It's interesting, nevertheless.
Mm-hmm.
But for first, let's get to Monday night. This past Monday, the Golden State Warriors played the Cleveland Cavaliers, and Draymond Green is on the trade block. So the Cavaliers decided to sit him.
Andre
And,
Drummond, right?
oh, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Andre Drummond. My bad. Sorry,
No, you're good.
Andre Drummond. And Draymond Green basically went on I guess a rant. He was very fired up, very passionate. I'm not going to read you the full thing because it's on social media if you want to go check it out. But I do want to read kind of this last part. This is regarding Harrison Barnes and DeMarcus Cousins of last year. And just get your thoughts overall on this entire situation because I think he makes a lot of good points. And I want to kind of, just before I read this, address him going on this rant and then just having the right to really say anything. And I bring that up because of Charles Barkley, because he was on Bill Simmons' podcast fairly lately. And he pointed to the Golden State Warriors not being, a top team in the Western Conference, and that loses you the right to really say these things just based on your record. So I want to get your thoughts as well. But first, just reading this is kind of the second half of what he had to say. Quote, and we're seeing situations of Harrison Barnes getting pulled off the bench, Green said, or DeMarcus Cousins finding out he's traded in an interview after the All-Star game, and we continue to let this happen. But I got fined for stating my opinion, what I thought should happen with another player. But teams can come out and continue to say, "Oh, we're trading guys, we're not playing you," and yet we're have to stay professional. So I agree with Draymond in this situation. I have always been on the side of players and being really confused as to why they're being fined in the first place. Not about this, but about this refs calls anyway. I never understood that. Players and coaches. I don't buy the reason of it. Oh, it challenges the legitimacy of the game, or, well, you're challenging it in terms of it being fixed. That never made any sense to me. But in terms of the situation, I think he's right. I think, organizations just get carte blanche in terms of sitting players and treating them any kind of way. And, he mentioned in the first part of his rant in terms of James Harden, he got annihilated and we were hard on him. And I think a lot of that criticism on James Harden was rightfully so. I think there's a limit in terms of not necessarily play, but I think a minimum in which you can reach being a professional. At the same time, him wanting a trade overall, if he was a spectacular player and still had the same stats and showed up on practice, he still got killed anyway. I mean, he still would have gotten the same criticism, in my opinion. So I think Draymond has a lot of good points in his rant that he went on. I wonder where it goes from here. If it's just, hey, he just want to get off his chest and life moves on, or is he going to take this to the Players Association and really make this a point as to organizations, treating their players better in this kind of trade scenario? So what are your thoughts on this, Matt? Do you think Draymond had the right to say these comments? Do you agree with them? Or do you think he's kind of misguided here in what he had to say?
Well, he certainly has the right to say whatever he wants. I don't know if he wound up being fined for these comments or not.
I'm not
I
sure
would
either.
suspect probably not, because he wasn't. It was kind of just a rant about the league in general. It's not like he was going after an official or a specific GM or something like that. I certainly don't agree with Draymond, and I think there is a lot of confusion in this, because Draymond brings up a lot of stuff. He
He
also
does.
later in the rant brings up Kyrie Irving and his mental health,
He
and
does.
more directs, at least in my opinion, that criticism was directed towards the media. So there's kind of these like three elements in Draymond's rant. But make no mistake about it, he's targeting his anger at teams and franchises and how it's a different standard for them. First thing I'll say is he's right that there is a double standard. I don't always think that this is as negative of a thing as what he's projecting. Like, for example, when it seems like a ridiculous scene for Drummond to go back, change into his street clothes, and then sit during this game. The reason the team is doing that is to protect Drummond, because if he gets injured during this game, the thinking is then maybe that trade falls through. The team is protecting their interest in terms of his trade value and his health on his transition into his new team. Um, what I'll also say is that these off the court comments, for one reason. I mean, it should be mentioned that Draymond basically said, and I don't remember the exact quote, so forgive me, but
Yeah,
Devin
no doubt.
Booker, come play with us in Golden State. He said that on a TNT broadcast,
He did.
and that's why he was fined. Um, Players like James Harden, they can make trade requests in private, and it's all good and well. And the team has no obligation to trade them necessarily. But like, for example, in the case of James Harden, they could have, you and I talked about it, they could have hung on to him for another year, 2 years for the length of his contract. He wouldn't be happy. He would probably, continue uh, kind of playing 50% like he was towards the last week or so there in order to power his way to another team. But they traded him because this is a business relationship. And I think they don't want that perception as well of being a franchise that's going to, be petty with players and treat them that way. Um, but the thing is, when statements are made in public by players, it can really affect the value that teams can get out of trades. Like it may be that you go from James Harden in a different hypothetical situation. You go from James Harden going to the Nets for the assets, the haul that they got from that trade, depending on what happens on the outside here, to maybe James Harden is on the Orlando Magic for much less of a return. So I think that's why things are operating differently. Now, definitely, I think it's clear that Draymond isn't happy about this. Obviously, that's the whole point of his rant, and a lot of people feel that way, and I get that. Um, I do tend to side with the team has this double standard in place in order to protect the assets that they're getting for the trade. And I don't think that there should be this sense that the Cavs were trying to like shame Andre Drummond by sitting him during that game, or shame Harrison Barnes if he's about to get traded. They are simply protecting that player from being hurt. Um, so I don't know. I don't line up exactly with what Draymond is saying here, but can you speak more to kind of the side of player empowerment and because I mean, in my opinion, there's still, even though these guys are 50-50 partners, there's still a bit of an employer-employee relationship here in the league. And I do wonder, 20, 30 years down the road, like when LeBron has the option of owning his own team, if that's something he wants to do, I do wonder if things will change and more players owning more teams will lead to some sort of change like that.
I think so. I think you're already seeing more of a player empowerment element. I think communication is important, and that's where I'll side with Draymond the most. With the whole DeMarcus Cousins situation, like you would think the organization would communicate with the player first before it gets out into the media. We never want to
Mm-hmm.
know in a tweet or on Sports Center that you were being traded. And that's a theme that Barkley talked about. I believe it was on Inside the NBA or maybe on the Bill Simmons podcast. I can't remember, but he has mentioned that you find out being traded. Shaq, he mentioned that specifically. He found out not through the media, and I think he said the only time that he was let know by the organization that he was being traded was Steve Kerr. That was
Mm,
the only time. So to me,
wow.
that is, I think, clearly unprofessional. That makes, I mean, I thought
I agree.
that doesn't make sense. You just tell the guy you're being traded goodbye. I mean, I don't know how hard that is just to tell the guy that's the case. I mean, you're not going to see him again. What's the point? So at least as an employee of your team. So I think with Draymond, he speaks for the players. I
Oh
understand
yeah.
where you're coming from, Matt. Um, I can see both sides of it. I mean, from an organization, like you're protecting the trade, you're protecting assets, so you're setting him. But at the same time, I'm like, the guy plays basketball every night, so you're saying he's fragile. Is it a psychological thing? He can't handle the pressure. So I think it kind of cuts both ways. But I kind of feel you, Matt, in terms of the organization. They're trying to protect that trade that they want to do. So overall, I don't know. I think my thing with Draymond, if he wants to really see things happen, then he needs to be involved, as with the president of the Players Association and challenge Chris
Agreed.
Paul for that title. If not, then I don't know what else he can do.
Well, they have
So
like 11 vice presidents. You
yeah,
can't get one of those
I
spots.
guess. Yeah. Or maybe he should try harder.
No, I'm with you
yeah.
though. Like,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but
No, go ahead, man.
you're 100% right as far as communication goes. I
Yeah.
mean, think of ourselves in our own lives. If our employer, like, let's say I got transferred to, I don't know, Utah to work, and I found out about this on a company release on Twitter
Right.
or something.
Right.
That would be terrible. And
Yeah, that would suck.
I do think it's basic decency, certainly for that type of communication. I would say really sit down face to face and let them know, or if it's happening that quickly, then get on the phone with them as quickly as possible. But yeah, definitely, I think you are seeing less than stellar management habits. If these players, if it's more common than not that these players aren't being notified. I guess it's easy to pick on owners. It's easy to punch up. I tend to see that trend a lot, like in a lot of the comments reading about this whole situation and things like that. But I do think there is a rhyme and reason to some of these double standards that exist. But absolutely, like communication, just talking to someone, that's a basic thing where I 100% agree with you as far as that goes.